or the clubs did, and then get to the fourth, and I hope this grows faster than the other three.
Well, I know we all do, and Casey, you've managed a lot of baseball teams in a lot of circumstances, in a lot of places. Would you say that this is the toughest managerial assignment you've ever undertaken?
Yes, it'll be the toughest managerial assignment I ever had, and it'll also be where you have to do it in a hurry. I have wealthy ownership, and with wealthy ownership, if money can do it, they'll put it out. Now, if you have to have Mr. Weiss to try and build it, he's had 30 years of experience, so I have an accomplished, might say, president, and that goes out and pick up the players. Now, if you got to have good coaches, I picked up some that have starred. Hornsby's hit 400. You know what Lavaghetta's done. You know what Hemus has done. You know what Red Crest has done, and I'd say Red Ruffing has done a very big job as a pitcher.
Well, of course, we're all new here, Casey, in this organization, and we have a couple of fellas that we'd like to get in here to get acquainted because we're the broadcasting team that'll be doing these games, telecasting all the games of the New York Mets. And, Casey, this is Bob Murphy. I think you know Bob Murphy.
I know Mr. Murphy. I heard about Mr. Murphy because he was in New England, and when he was in New England, I hope he brings a number of those Bostonians and all those Eastern people down into the new Met ballpark after the Polo Grounds, which will be in Flushing Stadium.
Right. And, Bob, I know you've been in the American League now for 8 years. What do you think about doing National League ball in New York?
Well, Lindsey, I couldn't be happier. I'm a little bit like Casey in the respect that I have been very impressed by the National League stars in these All-Star games, and it'll be a pleasure to watch them day after day.
All right, over here now, Casey, we have Mr. Ralph Kiner, whom I think you know.
Well, I know Mr. Korner very well. Mr. Korner was a young man that was starting out in Los Angeles, and I tried him out at Griffiths Park, and we didn't have any financial payroll, and he didn't want too much money. When we were financially broken, I couldn't sign the man, but I want to tell you, I hope that he's just as successful in this new field as a broadcaster as he was as a player. He made a rapid advancement. It was great, and when we get to Pittsburgh, I hope they follow him for 500 miles around Pittsburgh and see the big Ralph Kiner that hit that ball over the fence 3 miles.
Well, Ralph, you did have a great career. Now, what do you think about a season in the booth?
Well, of course, Lindsey, I'm looking forward to it very much, and welcome back to the National League, Casey. You know it is the big league.
That's
and the
true.
National League has always been my favorite. It's certainly going to be a pleasure to be watching your teams play, and it's going to be a wonderful pleasure to work with Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy, and I'm looking forward to every minute of it.
Well, fellas, thanks very much now, and while you're getting things set for the start of our season, I'll see if I can get the starting lineup here, huh?
Well, that's the way it was back in 1962. We have Lindsey Nelson live and in living color, and we also have Bob Murphy along with that. That was really amazing looking at that. Those things are fantastic.
Well, they are fantastic, and it's great to look back. It's the first time I'd seen any of that. I hadn't realized exactly how that went.
You haven't changed any.
Well, no, my wardrobe changed a little.
Yeah, well, the whole thing there, though, Lindsey, was the fact that that was all in black and white.
Yeah.
And then you went to color when the Mets went to color.
I went to color when color went to color.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Speaking of color, that's that thing you got on there. That's unreal.
Well, the two things about it: you never get shot by the deer hunters, and you never find a fella down at the corner with one like it. That's all.
Well, that's right. I don't think they make two of those. They couldn't. And you got Bob over here, and he's in black and white right now.
Well, I just said yesterday, I said, I know what Lindsey's going to do, so why try to fight a forest fire? I'll just get out a nice conservative black coat, and everything will be fine.
Well, those days back in 1962, the first year of the New York Mets were really fantastic. And, of course, I met Lindsey Nelson in the golf tournament, and I had the offer of broadcasting the Mets, and I went to Lindsey, and I said, Lindsey, what do you think about taking up this offer of broadcasting the New York Mets games? And he said, well, one thing for sure, it's the greatest city in the world. And he says, secondly, you're not replacing anybody. You're starting new. And that way, when you replace someone, then people always go back to the, well, so-and-so was better or whatever. And it proved to be very true.
Proved to be very true because nobody had ever broadcast like that, and no team had ever played like that. It was brand new.
Well, we had some great times in 1962. The Mets lost 120 ball games. We'll return after this message from Mitsubishi Stadium, and I have as my special guests Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy, and the three of us were inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame, and really a great honor, and it's great to be back with Lindsey once again. We all started together back in 1962. the first year of the Mets. And, of course, the Mets that year lost 120 ball games. I remember when George Weiss called me up. He was the general manager of the ball club, and he said, I'd like to have you broadcast the Mets games. And I said, why me? And he said, well, we checked out your record. You played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you had losing experience. And, boy, we lost a lot of ball games in those early days. But it was fun. It really was, Lindsey.
It was great fun. That was one of the unusual things. People ask now, they look back and they say, you won 40, you lost 120. It must have been drudgery going to the ballpark. It wasn't. It was marvelous going out there every day, because you were going to have some fun, and you didn't have to worry about whether or not you were going to win or lose. You knew you were going to lose. That's all right. That's taken for granted. But you were going to have some fun, and the great saving grace is the fact that Casey Stengel was there.
Of course, Bob Murphy came over from Baltimore and also had been with the Boston Red Sox, so he was used to winning. How did it affect you, Bob?
I agree with Lindsey completely. I never really thought about the fact that they were losing that many games because it was such fun. And at that time, the climate was just right for National League Baseball to come back to New York. New York had gone through a few years without a National League team, and we always kind of felt it was a National League town, and it was a thrill for me to get here. Lindsey and I usually would drive back and forth to the Polo Grounds, and I felt like you would kind of treated it like each day was opening day or a new season. You knew darn well you were going to probably lose the ball game, but the thing that George Weiss had done that was so smart was not only in hiring Casey Stengel, but bringing back those old National League favorites. Even though their career was practically over and they couldn't help you win a pennant or anything, they were such great favorites that everybody was just kind of in love with the ball club and not worrying too much about winning and losing.
I'll never forget the commercial you did with Homer.
Al Moore's dog, Homer?
Homer, yeah, the dog. We had a special mascot, and in fact, they took out some box seats so he could perform down there for the fans. And you had that commercial you had to do with him, and then we capped it off, and I said, which one is the dog?
You always were my top publicity guy. What about the day they tried to get Homer to run the bases?
He ran up, he cut right through the middle of the infield.
They trained him and trained him and trained him. As a big moment came, he was going to circle the bases. What did he do? He got to first and cut across, didn't he?
Cut right across the
And you don't
base.
understand. Homer lived at the Waldorf. He lived at the Waldorf and came out every day in a limousine.
He lived better than anybody.
Lived better than anybody. Lived better than anybody we had.
Well, we had some great times, but I see right here both you guys are wearing the 1969 World Series ring. The Mets won the World Series in 1969. That had to be the climax or the epitome of the whole thing with the Mets.
Well, there's no question, because the first 7 years, they've been years of absolute famine, and then here came this one great year of plenty, and the New York Mets were in the World Series, and I remember coming downstairs at the end of the 5th and final game in which the Mets would clinch the World Championship, thinking to myself, can you believe it? The Mets are about to be champions of the world, and they were.
And they were, and that parade down Fifth Avenue was another great thing. And in the park there, we had that great ceremony that took place there, and I ended up singing with Bob Merrill, and I couldn't believe it.
I remember at the end of spring training prior to the 69 season, talking with the late Gil Hodges, and as you will do at the end of spring training, I said to Gil, in your honest opinion, how many games do you think this team can win this year? And Gil never gave you a fast answer. He thought about it. He said, well, I think we can win 85 games. Well, I was shocked to hear that because, as Lindsey said, 7 years of famine. And then he thought a little bit further, and he said, you know, if I really, down deep in my heart, believe that we can win 85 games, he said, as a manager, why don't I figure out a way to win another 10? We might win a pennant.
And he did win a pennant.
And he did win a pennant.
They won 100 games that year, and, of course, the Mets had come in 1968 from 9th place into becoming the world champion, so that was quite a move. Incidentally, WR is celebrating their 35th anniversary coming up right now. Maybe that's going to be a special year for the Mets. The Mets still are in it as far as this season is concerned.
Well, this is a remarkable Mets ball club. This club is almost as remarkable as the 1969 team. And it's a very young team, and it's a team that has just excited all of us. If anybody had told any of us on opening day this year, hey, this team can win 85 to 90 games, you would have kind of chuckled about it, wouldn't you?
Well, I just would have said that you're crazy. There's no way it can happen.
Well, I tune in to see the Mets, and I see some fine young pitching. And when I do, I say, I thought I saw that once before, about 1969.
That's right, with Tom Seaver and Jerry Kuzma and Gary Gentry and...
Now the names have changed. It's Dwight Gooden and Darryl Strawberry and Keith Hernandez and so on and so forth. George Foster.
Yeah, the game's the same. The names are changing all the time. We'll return right after this message from Mitsubishi. Here at Shea Stadium, and we have as my special guests on the show, Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy, and the three of us were inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame, and it's really quite an honor. And when we started out back in 1962 together, we never figured that we'd be together, the three of us, for 17 years. That's the all-time record for three announcers being together. And to be in that small broadcast booth for all those years, and we got along. That's amazing. They never had a fight.
That's the most fantastic thing, that for 17 years we worked together very closely, and at the end of 17 years we were better friends than we were when we started.
Oh, boy. What took place over those 17 years?
And we'll never in our life forget the day, a Sunday afternoon, second game of a doubleheader. Ralph would always leave at the 8th inning to go down to Korner, to do Korner's postgame television show. Well, that second game of that doubleheader went 23 innings. Every now and then they'd punch up a shot, Lindsey, of Ralph sitting down here in the control room, and there he'd be smoking a cigar, relaxing, and we're still up there working. What a pal.
He can't come upstairs because the game might end any time. He's got to be down here.
Well, so I started upstairs one time, Lindsey, and that's when Cepeda hit in that triple play. It looked like that'd be the end of the ball game.
Well, Bob and I were switching off every 3 innings upstairs because the tough part becomes the radio part because you're talking all the time. So every 3 innings we were passing in the hall saying, see you later.
You know, my favorite story of you two was when Jim Bunning pitched the perfect game against the New York Mets. And it was the first game of a doubleheader, and I was down in the field to do an interview with him. And I was out there standing, and all of a sudden a very attractive woman came out of the stands, running on the field, and grabbed him and kissed him. And I forgot which way it went. You said...
Murph asked me.
Yeah, okay.
Murph asked me, is that his wife? And I said, I certainly hope so. It was. It was.
It happened to be, it was his wife. That, to me, is one of the great ones. Of course, one of the great stories was 1969, and the first celebration was in the clubhouse with the Mets with the champagne all over. And then again, it happened when the Mets beat the Atlanta Braves, and then, of course, the World Series. But those days, I really don't believe anybody believed that the ball club was that good, but it turned out to be.
I think you're right, and I think that the greatest celebration in any sports event I've ever been was the first one when they beat St. Louis and won the Eastern Division, because that was pure. It was absolutely pure and was so honest. The later celebrations, of course, were a little rehearsed. After all, they'd done this before. This was old hat. But that first night, after they beat St. Louis, I think it was September 23rd, long in there, 24th, and here in Shea Stadium, that was the most marvelous clubhouse scene I've ever hoped to see.
Well, that was a long time ago, and the Mets, of course, are back on the track again, fighting for a first-place finish. Lindsey, since you left the Mets, you went to San Francisco. Now, what are you doing?
I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. I work a little in the School of Journalism there, the College of Communications, do a little teaching. I write a column for the newspaper. I'm writing a book. I've been working on it about 1.5 years, and I'll be out in about another year. So I've got just enough things to keep me off the street. I do football for CBS, of course, and we'll have a full season of that.
What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is a very difficult title because it's one I used all my life. It's Hello, Everybody, I'm Lindsey Nelson.
Sounds great.
The publisher said, how do you like it? And I said, well, it's a better title than Hello, Everybody, I'm Ted Husing.
Or Bill Stern.
Bill Stern.
Lindsey is a very gifted writer. He always has written very well, in the very early days of the Mets. Lindsey had a book out about those early days of the New York Mets. It was a fun book.
Well, that was the whole thing about the Mets. The fun is part and parcel of it. That's
Absolutely.
it.
Well, the one book you wrote, Backstage at the Mets?
Backstage at the Mets.
Yeah.
And that was a story mostly of Casey Stengel and the marvelous things that happened with Casey and the unusual things that happened with the Mets because, as you recall, we went out to St. Louis, got rained out the first night, lost the second game, came to New York. Now we've got a day off before we open in New York. They had a ticket tape parade up Lower Broadway. Here's a baseball team that's played only one game in its whole career, lost it, and it's being honored with a ticket tape parade up Lower Broadway.
Well, every time the Mets would come off of a road trip in those early days, and they were dead last and losing 5 games a week, there'd be 3,000 or 4,000 people at the airport.
Speaking of getting honored, Bob Murphy, Lindsey Nelson, and I were honored out here today in the Hall of Fame Day for the New York Mets. And Lindsey, it's great to see you again.
It's great to see you, Ralph. It's a great pleasure always, Robert.
Lindsey, so good of you to be here.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Of course, Bob Murphy and I are still working. Might not be working after this broadcast.
That's a good point.
Not too sure about that. We'll return after this message from...